Interesting developments in Latin America and the Caribbean over the past week, following the return of Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva from a trip to China, where he met with China's President Xi Jinping. Brazil was the first of a number of countries in the Latin America-Caribbean region to host a visit from Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. On Thursday, Lavrov arrived in Havana, Cuba, where he was set to be received by Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel. The foreign ministers of the two countries were expected to discuss a wide range of topics related to the development of cooperation between Russia and Cuba, as well as regional and international issues. Cuba is the last country on Lavrov's Latin American tour, which began Monday. He visited Brazil, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And for more on that, we go to Nicaragua to speak with journalist Stephen Sefton. He spoke with us from Esteli, Nicaragua, via Skype on Thursday. Stephen, it's a pleasure to have you, and interesting that the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, has been bouncing around Central and South America and the Caribbean, Brazil, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, I think, is coming up. And
well, I think he's in Cuba.
He's in Cuba today, Thursday? Okay. So you've been following it, so fill us in.
Well, yeah, maybe we should go country by country
Sure.
in relation to Foreign Minister Lavrov's visit to the region.
Sure.
And his first stop was Brazil. And it's probably important to remember that his visit to Brazil took place immediately after President Lula da Silva's own visit to Beijing,
Right.
Where President Lula met with the Chinese government, President Xi Jinping, and other important Chinese leaders to cement his relationship as a member of the BRICS group.
Right.
And so one of the interesting things that came out of Foreign Minister Lavrov's visit was that Foreign Minister Lavrov reaffirmed the Russian Federation's support for Brazil to obtain a permanent post on the UN Security Council.
That's right.
So that's a very important point from Foreign Minister Lavrov's visit, because there was some, prior to his visit, there was some uncertainty about that stemmed from Lula da Silva's somewhat unhelpful remarks as regards special military operation in Ukraine.
Right. It was at least ambiguous, to be gentle about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that it looks as though the visit by Sergei Lavrov, in which he actually met President Lula da Silva, who had by then returned from China,
right,
went some way to mending any fences that may have been broken or damaged as a result of Lula da Silva's somewhat ill-considered remarks. One of the important points to note from President Lavrov's press conference in Brazil was that he noted that despite all the difficulties last year for countries around the world, trade and investment between Brazil and the Russian Federation reached a record level last year of around $8 billion.
Wow.
Which isn't a huge amount in global trade terms, but the fact that it was a record increase in terms of the relations between Brazil and the Russian Federation is quite important. And of course, they will have agreed to continue and deepen the technical cooperation of Russia's nuclear industry with Brazil, because that's one of the most important investments that the Russian Federation has in Brazil, in all kinds of aspects of nuclear power, not just for energy production, but also especially for its medical uses. So on all of that was quite important. From Brazil, Sergei Lavrov went to Venezuela, and he had meetings with both the Venezuelan foreign minister, who's now a compañero called Ivan Gil, and he also met with Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan president. And it was quite interesting that in his remarks to the press, Foreign Minister Lavrov said that one of the main concerns of Russia was to make sure that, insofar as possible, it could assist Venezuela to a point where it was no longer dependent, in economic terms, on its relations with the United States and Europe, which I thought was a very interesting point. And this is a textual quote: "We'll do everything possible so that the Venezuelan economy depends less and less on the caprices and geopolitical games of the United States or any other actor in the Western camp." That's literally what he said. It's very clear that one of the main purposes of Foreign Minister Lavrov's visit is to broaden and deepen the commercial and investment relationships that Venezuela has, in particular with the Russian Federation, obviously.
Right.
And as part of the programs, they're talking about increasing cooperation in the petroleum industry, increasing cooperation in terms of developing gas reserves, developing agricultural production, the pharmaceutical and medicine industry, communications, and also space technology. Because of course Venezuela has, I think is it 2 or possibly 3 now, satellites that it operates thanks to support from China.
Right.
So, and I also think that Venezuela is one of the countries that has been invited to take part by the People's Republic of China in the proposed lunar station that China and Russia may well cooperate in setting up over the next few years, but we'll see.
Right.
But it's interesting that they're paying that level of attention to Venezuela. And then while he was in Caracas, Sergei Lavrov actually did meet with Bolivia's foreign minister, Rogelio Meta. But I don't think they had very extensive talks, but it was a very important meeting because it enabled Sergei Lavrov to make the main points that he had in mind during his visit to Brazil, Venezuela, Nicaragua and Cuba, and also share those points with Bolivia's foreign minister. So it was a very useful visit for Sergei Lavrov to Venezuela. And then from Venezuela, he moved on to Nicaragua.
Yeah.
And of course, for us here in Nicaragua, that was an extremely important visit because you may remember that I think it was about a month ago now.
Yeah.
Nicaragua's foreign minister was in Moscow. And while he was there, the Russian Federation signed a cooperation agreement with Nicaragua to develop nuclear technology for medical purposes and also for some agricultural purposes as well. Now, in Nicaragua, Russia already has a very important plant producing vaccines called the Mechnikov plant, and they produce something like, they're capable of producing around 30 million doses a year of vaccines of different kinds, and they're, as far as I know, they're the only vaccine producing plant in the Central American region. So that Russia already has that very strong technological relationship in medical technology relationship with Nicaragua. But more importantly, although Nicaragua is a very small country of only 7 million people, it plays a very important role for Russia in the region. And an example of that is the fact that, and that, I think that's true also of the People's Republic of China, because in terms of Russia's presence and influence in the region, Nicaragua is their kind of advocate inside the Central American integration system, which includes all the Central American countries plus the Dominican Republic. And so Russia was granted observer status to the Central American system formally, I think, last year. But so far, that has yet to be implemented because the United States is putting pressure on a couple of countries in the region not to go ahead with implementing Russia's observer status to the region because of events in Ukraine. But Nicaragua is arguing very strongly inside the Central American system, and the Russian Federation obviously very much appreciates that. In terms of both the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, Nicaragua is kind of a little like a model economy for them that they can work with, because it's only a population of 7 million people. So the kinds of investments that Russia and China would be able to make in Nicaragua will have a disproportionate importance inside Nicaragua compared to their the relatively small cost in terms of the economies of China and the Russian Federation. So what you're talking about is modernization of the port on the Caribbean coast near Bluefields, and connecting that by rail with the important port of Corinto on the Pacific coast. Right. And that's a relatively small infrastructure project for the Russian Federation, but it's a huge project for Nicaragua, and it'll completely transform the commercial possibilities, the transport possibilities for Nicaraguan producers and for people importing into Nicaragua as well. Right. So those kinds of deals are incredibly important for a small country like Nicaragua, a relatively small cost to the Russian Federation. So they get a disproportionately large advantage from developing that relationship with Nicaragua in regional terms. And I'm sure that although we haven't, so far there hasn't, I think as we talk, Sergei Lavrov is actually holding a press conference in Havana in Cuba. And I should imagine that what we'll see in his remarks to the media in Havana will be very similar, a strong emphasis on defending Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela from the illegal, unilateral, coercive measures applied by the United States and the European Union, what people often refer to as sanctions. And that's been a constant theme also in Foreign Minister Lavrov's remarks at the different points of his visit. Man. So I'm sure he'll make a point of that, especially in Cuba, that's been subjected to 60 years of illegal blockade, genocidal blockade.
Oh, the worst. Yeah, this is the worst. So we'll take a look at what he actually says next week, because we're out of time. And I really appreciate you sharing with us what this very important visit means, and giving us an idea of what it can mean going forward. Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome, Don. Thanks for inviting me.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.